Hello. Hello, Delores. I know
Hello.
you are ready to rejoin the Forbidden Grief conversation and talk about Miguel, which we haven't really talked very much about Miguel.
Mhm.
So, where would you like to start today?
Well, very interesting week that I've had so far. My my daughter lives 3 hours east of where Hector and Miguel lived, and I live 3 hours west. And so we kind of meet in the middle. And there are things that we still need to take care of as far as the legal stuff is concerned with Hector's estate. And so she and I decided to meet there and to work on the house and work on, the stuff we needed to do in town. And so to catch everybody up, if they're not familiar with the event that we're referring to, is at the beginning of July, on July 4th, my son Miguel went into his father's room in the middle of the night, maybe 1 o'clock in the morning, and fatally wounded him with a kitchen knife. And then Miguel left the house and tried to break into one neighbor's house, and he broke the window, but he couldn't get in. So, interesting. Like when you step into the scenario, I mean, there's a lot of blood, and because he broke the window with his hand. And then he went over to the other neighbor's house on the other side of Hector's house and was able to gain entrance into their house and threaten them with a knife. And the husband of the home was able to get his own handgun and then fatally wounded Miguel. And so on the 4th of July, I lost both my husband, my ex husband, and my son in a double homicide, which, as you and I have discussed, Sue, it really has boiled down to a homicide and then what feels like an assisted suicide. And that's one of those unanswerable questions of really what was going on. And so my daughter is the living heir to her father, and so she is in charge of his estate, and I'm simply being there to help her. She is, in my opinion, very young, and I wouldn't like to abandon her in this, and just want to help her. And so we were there in that town. It's a very small rural town in eastern Arizona.
And it's not an easy process dealing with someone's estate, regardless of your age. Doesn't matter if you're in your 20s or your 50s or your 70s. I don't know that it gets easier if you don't do it regularly, and I hope nobody has to do it regularly. So,
Yeah, and that's a point well taken because she'll ask me questions, and I'm like, honey, like when my own mother passed away, my sister took care of it. I didn't take care of it. So yes, I have had people in my family pass, but I've never taken care of their estate. So yes, point well taken. This is really uncharted water.
and
Yeah.
so I know we wanted to talk about the elephant in the room. Is that your experience with when you were with Alejandra, your daughter? Does she not want
Um,
to talk about Miguel, or do you find that you don't want to talk about Miguel when you're with her?
it um, it really isn't an elephant with her. It's more of um, like I actually did talk to her about it, but it's just really not a. It kind of feels like a unnecessary conversation with her. There's a different feel for it, but there was one time. So Hector's house has been unoccupied for. I was there a month ago, and suffering from COVID, and I'm laying on my old couch, and but so like I didn't do anything at the house, and so we met there, and with the rain and everything in the monsoon season, the weeds had gotten had taken control of a portion of the yard, and so she and I were like, yeah, we got to get out there and get those weeds pulled. And um, it it is a it's a strange experience because when we're in the house, we double bolt lock all the doors, and we kind of freak out when somebody comes to the door. And
Why is that?
uh, because nobody should be coming over to that house, and we don't know anybody, and like everybody knows what happened at that house. It's like the marked house. And so we're out. It was maybe, oh, I don't know, late afternoon. And we were out in the front yard and we were pulling weeds. And I had gone around to the side, and she was out in the front yard, and somebody pulled up. And bless her heart. She's an adult, and she comes running to the backyard, and she's like, Mom, there's somebody that just pulled up. And it was, I'm like, get behind me. I'm like all protective of her. It's like, who the hell is this? And it turned out to be one of Hector's coworkers and friend that they had gone to church together. So we had met this guy back in July when we had toured the mine. And so, but we didn't know what vehicle he drove. So he came up, and we're like, okay, we know this guy. He's friendly. It's fine. And so we were talking to him. And then here comes this lady walking down the street, and she stops, and he starts talking to her. Well, I didn't recognize her. It turns out to be, it was a female, but she was the responding officer when the homicides happened. Well, as it turns out, she was actually a personal friend of Hector's. They had gone to church together. So so not only is she the responding officer, but she was a friend of Hector's. And so, really, it was actually a lovely experience. Is that all four of us are standing out there on the driveway. We're laughing, we're hugging, we're crying, we're talking, we're sharing stories. And and that was a beautiful thing because, Sue, this woman found my people.
Yeah.
And it to be able to have that kind of conversation with her, like an interpersonal conversation, it kind of does. It's like, wow, this is weird. Like, this is weird. Kind of.
Did it feel like divine perfect timing that you were out there talking to somebody she knew so she would feel comfortable stopping where she might not have stopped if it had just been the two of you out there pulling
Yeah,
weeds?
I think that she would have stopped. She said she had told us. I have her personal cell number. I have her work number. I have her personal cell number. She says that she walks past the house every day, that she lives very close. And so, that's a wonderful thing. And because she goes on her evening or morning walks. And so it feels good to have somebody's, and especially a police officer's, eyes on a vacant house, and especially with what happened. I have actually been a little concerned about being safe while we're in the house. If there's any retribution, like any of the neighbors are angry or whatever, but I feel like we're okay there.
Have you experienced any of the neighbors being angry?
No, that the I know that Miguel had shared with me some conflicts that he had with one of the neighbors. I don't know which neighbor it was. I do kind of think it was the one that he broke the window, but he couldn't get into their house. I kind of think it was them, and but I haven't talked to them. The man actually came out of his house when we were standing in the driveway talking, but he just got in his vehicle and left. He didn't approach us or anything. So, but I have no idea. But when a double homicide happens in a small town on your street, you just kind of wonder how people feel about that and how they're going to respond.
Yeah.
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 So we were standing there, and this is where I really felt like there was an elephant in the room. Is that these two people are friends with Hector, and on multiple levels, and it's very easy to talk about Hector. Hector was well loved. He was a wonderful man, great sense of humor. He was very warm and welcoming, and we laugh about. There's probably not going to be anybody that's ever going to have anything bad to say about Hector, and so it's very easy to talk about Hector, and I just find that, I mean, these two people know that we lost another member of our family too, but it's not so easy to talk about that elephant. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wonder if if the other moms that are experiencing forbidden grief, if they feel that, is that people know your son is gone, but they don't say anything.
So
And
it went from, something we talked about in an earlier conversation about people asking questions, wanting to know the story, wanting to try and make sense of it, to now they don't want to talk about it at all. Is that what you're saying?
it kind of feels that way, or they don't know how to talk about it in a, a positive way. Like, it's easy to talk about Hector in a positive way, but it's not so easy to talk about Miguel in a positive way. And I'm sorry, but my son was not 100% evil and corrupt. Like maybe they didn't know, maybe they just didn't know any good parts of Miguel.
Maybe they didn't know him at all. A
Yeah.
lot of them.
Yeah.
So Hector had been living in that small town for how long?
Maybe 3 years.
And how long was Miguel living with him?
The whole time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
some of these people at least crossed paths with Miguel if they didn't know him very well.
Yeah. Yeah. And so as I reflected on this, I I find myself bringing Miguel into the conversation very actively, and especially talking about forbiddengrief.org, is that this is what I'm doing with my grief and my pain, and how I've been prepared and positioned to do this. And you know what? I'm telling you, sure as shooting, um, when people have several kids, there's always going to be that one. And the man who we were visiting with, he actually has 4 boys, and he goes, "Yeah, my second one." And I'm like, "Let's talk about that." And it's so easy to talk about the glowing reports, but you've got that one kid that you're just like, "I don't know what to do with this kid." And I find myself really liking to talk about those kids. And yeah, I don't know how Alejandra experiences this, to tell you the truth, though. And she's pretty quiet.
And it's been one thing that we set out to talk about and sort of missed talking about in an earlier video was, being the mom of that kid. But let's go there. That feels really appropriate this time because you're having those conversations now with people.
Yeah.
So when was it that Miguel started to be labeled as, the problem child or a troublemaker or a kid that you just had to keep an eye on?
When he was 6, when he went to half day kindergarten, no, it was even before that. I was like, oh, I'm going to put, they had a little preschool program at the community rec center. And I'm like, I'm going to do that because then that will help him get ready for school. And it was just half day kindergarten. And I remember, I mean, this is at the rec center. We go to it all the time. And it was just in a little side classroom. And and so he's like maybe not quite 6 or just about 6, and Alejandra would have been 4. And so of course she's with me because I'm taking him. And then I was going to take her to the babysitting room so I could go work out. And my kids are happy. I'm happy. We're all there together. We're just doing our separate thing. He doesn't want to stay there. She wants to stay there in the preschool. And he's supposed to be there and he doesn't want to stay there. And I'm like, this is preschool. Like, what? Like, you should want to be there. And so I'm going to say that it started at preschool. And then when he went to kindergarten, Sue, there was one time that he went 6 weeks without a smiley face on his little sticker chart. So, everybody's names are up on the chart, and then the teacher will give them smiley face stickers. And Miguel ain't got none for 6 weeks. And I'm like, wow.
What was he doing that was so challenging or disruptive or triggering for the teacher?
Probably couldn't sit still, probably went over and did what he wanted to do. Really, in hindsight, he probably was just being Miguel and wanted to play. But we don't do that in school. That's not good behavior. And right. So it doesn't get rewarded.
Yeah. So it was probably as simple as he just didn't sit still and be quiet when you're supposed to be quiet.
That's right.
He wanted to do what he wanted to do, which, wow. Isn't it funny how that gets taught out of us in school, and then as adults we have to relearn how to do that again? It's like, yeah. Not that there's any problems with the educational system, but maybe a little overhaul needed there.
Yeah. And so so at 6 years old, we're taking him into an educational psychologist and getting him diagnosed. And 6.
And what did he get diagnosed with?
ADHD, a couple of different learning disabilities.
Like dyslexia or
not dyslexia. I honestly don't remember. And the funny thing is that I kind of think reading was one of them. But the thing is that kid, that was one of his hyper-focused areas. And so if people don't, maybe you understand, ADHD kids, you think that they can't focus, but the truth of the matter is that if they have something that they really love, they hyper-focus on it. And he could, he was a big Harry Potter fan, and those books, I don't know that I've read a book that thick. And he was reading those books in 3rd grade. And he loved those books. And I am like, so did he have a learning disability because he didn't want to read things that he didn't want to read? And I don't know that. So honestly, I'm gonna have to say I don't remember. But I do remember that there were 2 or 3 different learning disabilities that he was diagnosed with. I do remember, when he was in 6th grade, he was in a special needs school, and they said that he had dysgraphia. And and it kids with dysgraphia, it's almost like a placement malalignment. Is that like when you have a piece of paper, like other people will write from the left to the right, and like he would take all his notes like all up in the right hand corner. You're like, why don't you use the whole paper? I'm just going to write up here. And the way that they hang on to the writing utensil is different, is unique. And yeah, so there were things. But you know, in hindsight, the two things that I would be more concerned with now is that he was diagnosed as oppositional defiant and also a mood regulating disorder. And the school hyper focuses on learning disability and ADD stuff. And even the psychiatrist that oversaw his medication, I mean, they don't talk about the ODD, the oppositional defiant, or the mood disorder. And, you know, truth be known, those are bigger concerns than being hyperactive.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So looking back, you know, with all the wisdom you have now and all the experience you have now, do you think he really was defiant?
Um, you know, I don't know which came first. I do think he was defiant. It was. I mean, like I remember when he was young, he would say, you know, when I get in trouble for doing something, it just makes me want to do it more. Like he had that self-awareness. And I mean, he just, I remember him, we were out in the backyard and he's like, you know, when you take that away from me, like we would take his internet away or whatever, he's like, it just makes me want to break the rules more. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know what to do with that, but okay.
Did he explain that? Like, what is it? What was it that made it more appealing?
No, but he would say it about school too. And so the punishment did not discourage him or diminish the desire. It did not foster a desire to be obedient to the rule. It almost was like a challenge. It's just like you can't control me. And so being told what to do and what not to do, that was just like a challenge to him. It was like a personal challenge. And
As we're coming into, you know, as we're in these times, we're obviously in very interesting and rare times on the planet where everything is sort of coming to a head, right? Everything is ready to shift and change from the old patriarchal, very command and control, whether we're talking in the workplace or in the military or in the school system. You know, you will be a good student. You will sit down, you will pay attention, you will do what the teacher says. You will become a good factory worker is really what our school system is set up to be still. You will you will learn just enough to be able to do the jobs that need to be done, but you know, a lot of schools now are starting to work on critical thinking and all those other things. But there was a time when it was really just about standardized test scores, and a lot of schools are still like that. So you've got to, there are too many kids in the classroom. You can't be disruptive. You all need to sit down and pay attention to the teacher and do whatever it is that you're supposed to do. And it's on a larger perspective, it's easy to see how Miguel was here to challenge that and maybe help change that system that is really about suppressing who you are, suppressing what you know, suppressing the way that we're built to know. You know, our brains are built to be the antenna receiving the information we need in the moment, not little computer processing machines like we're taught to be in school, that you have to show how you got your answer and you have to show it the way the teacher taught it to you and basically regurgitate what was taught to you in the classroom.
yes.
So Do you feel like maybe it was all about Miguel wanting to be Miguel and being told almost everywhere he turned, no, you can't be. And so he was like, well, you can't stop me.
Yeah, and I totally honor him for that. And looking back, I can see that. And that's why I want to talk to these people about their outliers. And that's what I had taught Miguel, that is that I'm like, there is nothing wrong with you. You're just an outlier. So like I remember he was like in second grade, in fourth grade, I can't remember. And he was complaining about him being dumb. And I was like, oh no, that is not one word that I would use to describe you. You like have way too many brain cells functioning. It's that you don't think like the rest of those kids. You're an outlier. And they treat you like that's a bad thing. But dude, you are like out of the box thinker. And I would never call you dumb or unintelligent. Like you think differently. And um and and the, it, and it's such a challenge because I'm such a rule follower. I did so well at school. I mean, I was a college professor, and I'm like, I don't even know how to deal with this kid. That like, how do you deal with outliers? And you know, so when that friend of Hector's was talking about his one son of his four sons, and I was like, you know what? If I had do-overs, from my vantage point, I would become an expert on how that kid functions. And yes, you can listen to what these other people are saying and take it into consideration, and then you look at what works for your child and appreciate his uniqueness. And Sue, you mentioned that that they have to show how they got their answer. And okay, so even before, and I mentioned dysgraphia, and I don't know why I think it's so intriguing. That's why I'm coming back to this. Is that it's actually a processing thing. So if I'm going to take notes or I'm going to write what I'm thinking, if we do not struggle with dysgraphia, we really just have this thought process that's coming down from our brain and down through the musculature and all the anatomy of our hand, and we're able to write. Okay? If you are taking notes in a class, oh my gosh, talk about this kid short circuiting. I'm like, don't, like, he literally cannot do it. And so I can remember he was maybe in second grade, and he's supposed to be doing his math, and he's supposed to be showing how he's doing it. And he would get so frustrated because he had it up here, but then to get it out out through his hand, out through the pencil, was like a completely different task. And so I would take him down to the library, and we would shut ourselves in the study room, and I would verbally tell him what the math problem was. And I remember this one time, Sue, I should have taken a picture of it. He was there was like a chair rail. He was standing on his hands, and his feet were wedged up under the chair rail. So he is literally doing a handstand, doing his math. And I am writing it down. And he's doing it in his head. And there would be times where he would say, I would go, did you hear the problem? And he's like, Mom, I'm figuring it out. Be quiet. And I'm like, okay. And so I would watch him, and you can, it wasn't like he was daydreaming or he was off. He was like doing the calculations. And luckily, fortunately, so blessed, his teacher allowed us to do that because she understood Miguel. And so I would just verify that I was just his scribe. That's all I was. And what does it matter? He's going to type things. Like the vast majority of us don't even write things. Like he could write enough. It wasn't like he couldn't write, but to do this extensive stuff, no, it it shut off his showing that he knew how to do it.
It's so interesting. And it reminds me of people who've had a stroke, right? Where it's still going on in here, but they can't make the body do it anymore.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he just never worked that way. It's one of the aspects of diversity, equity, and inclusion that is starting to become part of the conversation more now in terms of diversity is neurodiversity.
Yes.
And this is so interesting because a lot of us are more aware of, say, people on the autism and Asperger's spectrum, or even people with like a savant kind of experience where they're super genius in one area and may not have a lot of social skills or other areas that are not as, let's say, advanced. So Miguel had it all going on in his head, but his body functioned differently. And so talk about neurodiversity. And they're different parts of your brain, right? The motor skills are different from the cognitive reasoning.
Yeah.
So very interesting that they were
And
disconnected and that was not easy for, a teacher in a classroom to make space for or to even recognize.
and like when he got into middle school and they're supposed to be teaching him note taking, I'm like, oh, and again, I have the benefit of hindsight. And so, I'm not beating myself up. I'm just recognizing, oh, that's what it was. And now I want to be very clear about this. Miguel was an incredible athlete. So he was not uncoordinated. He was extremely coordinated. And that's a different thing because many kids that are ADHD or ADD are not very physically coordinated. That kid, we put him in swimming, and he's a very good swimmer. And I remember one time I was trying to hurry him up, and I'm like, come on, we got to get going. And he is standing there. And at this particular, where we lived, they had a beautiful diving well. And the high school kids were over there practicing. And he's standing here. So he's like 6 or 7. And he is watching them like, not just casually, like he is, it was almost like the movies where he's doing this little analysis and watching, like, where is that man's pinky finger? Like when he's diving, like I could see this happening in his brain. And he's a little kid. And he wasn't even in the diving team, but the big kids were over there doing it. And so I watched him watch them, and I'm like, oh, he's learning how to dive right now. And just by standing there, and it was amazing. And we didn't live there long enough for him to join the diving team, but that was something that I was like, oh, he already knows how to dive just by watching them.
And
And
that's so it's such an amazing skill that again is not really appreciated in the moment in the classroom. But if we think of Leonardo da Vinci, like most people are in awe of what Leonardo da Vinci was able to accomplish that long ago. And most of what he learned by watching how the birds fly, and then he had all these visions. I mean, he designed a helicopter. He was able to watch how things functioned and understand it in a way that it sounds like Miguel was able to do.
yeah,
So he had genius,
yeah,
but he didn't present as a well-behaved, rule-following, able to do it the way the teacher asks you kind of kid.
yeah, yeah. and and so I don't remember. I don't know that this friend that I was talking to out on the driveway about his outlier son. I don't remember how old he is. I don't remember that he said, what the kid was doing or not doing. But I'm sure that it's, he's not sitting still. He's not, I mean, I think it's, I don't know, I assume that that's kind of classic, and that they actually are, they don't want to get him diagnosed. And I can understand that. However, sometimes it can give you a starting point of learning. Well, I don't know. I think it might bias you too much of how to deal with an ADD kid versus just seeing how your kid optimally functions. And that's what I told the friend. I was like, become an expert on what how your child flourishes and blooms and blossoms versus things that hold him down. And I told the guy, I said, you know what your job is as a dad. I was kind of shoving shoulds. I said, your job is to enjoy that child and just love him, and really become an expert on helping him just blossom. And it spoke truth to that friend. Yeah.
Do you think, again, hindsight, and we're not about shoulds or shoulda, woulda, couldas. Do you think Miguel might have thrived more in a situation like homeschooling, or maybe a Montessori school, or something different than what he
Yeah.
experienced?
Yeah, and and that's how he ended up in that special school. You're gonna love this. So this was a private academy that we found, and we put him in when I want to say when he was 6th grade, so 12 years old, and he stayed for a year. Was in the principal's office just as much as he was in a regular school. He was in the nurse's office just as much. And at the end of the school year, the director actually sat Hector and I down. And she's like humming and hawing about it. And I go, so what you're telling me is that your school, who specializes in these kind of kids, you cannot serve my child. And she goes, that's correct. And I was like, oh, when the specialty school cannot even help your child thrive, you go, well, like, what do you do? And, Miguel would like I did set him up with homeschool one time when he was maybe high school. But it really was an online school. So really he was going to school in the same scenario, but he was at home. And so it wasn't, it tricked me. I didn't get it. But I don't know. I didn't feel like I could homeschool him in the true classic sense. And I wasn't willing, able, or ready to do that. And so I at least knew that I wasn't going to do it. I couldn't do it at that time.
And I think one of the things that we're really talking about here is that there's no one right answer to anything, and that every child is so different. And maybe we can give some grace to that special needs school also for not being able to know what to do with Miguel, because Miguel was unique.
Yeah. Yeah. And there were blessings that came out of it. And so, but it was, it felt very disheartening. And I didn't, I just read something the other day, and it gave me a lot of comfort and allowed me to give myself compassion. Um, is that it was talking about, when these kids are growing up, it is they are you feel very challenged by their behaviors, and it's exhausting, and it like you have no bandwidth left to become an expert on what that child is doing because you're so exhausted. And yeah, if I had do-overs, I'd become an expert on that. And
So you've mentioned that a couple times. Ha- For those moms and dads who have a challenging child, a child who challenges them, how how might they consider becoming an expert? Like, if you were going to do it differently, what would you do to become an expert on Miguel?
the very first thing that I would do is that I would give myself permission to parent the child the way that I felt was best. Because it was, Miguel, I have to fit into this box as a good mother. Okay? And therefore, you need to fit in this box as a good boy. Because if you don't, then it looks like I'm a bad mother.
And how many
And
people struggle with that every single day? Because how
yes,
many shoulds and how much programming is in that simple statement?
yeah, like, yeah. So the very first step is that I would give myself permission to be an outlier parent.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I wasn't there. Now I could much better. Well, I am. I already parent Alejandra very different than the trajectory I was on. And
And
so
Miguel too. I mean, let's acknowledge that. The last couple
yeah,
years, 5 years of Miguel's
yes.
life, you were a very different mom than you were when he was younger. Like, you've been evolving and growing, and
Yeah,
we all are.
yes.
Yeah. So for all those parents watching who are struggling with how to parent, whether you have an easy child or a hard child, let's just let you off the hook that your child's actions are not a reflection of whether you are a good parent or not. And that every one of us, child, parent, brother, sister, is so different. Let's stop trying to do it the right way, because there's no one right way, and stop
No.
trying to please those external people who we think are judging us, that we don't even know what they're thinking, but we feel their judgment because we've been taught to feel their judgment and to be ashamed of their judgment and to turn ourselves into pretzels to avoid their judgment. So the angels want to really come in and do some soothing to all of the nervous systems of
Yeah.
all of the parents. At the end of the day, it's all about love. It's all about unconditional love for yourself first and then your child. Because again, when you're so exhausted from dealing with a really challenging child, you have to take care of yourself in order to be there for your child in a loving way. Self love first, love for everyone else next. Anything in the way of that, let's uncreate, delete, dissolve, and dissipate all of that programming, creating space in your life to love yourself exactly as you are and to love that other being exactly as they are. So much of what we're taught to do is about changing the other person. And so much of it is from a good-hearted space, right? We want them to fit in so that they are able to succeed in the world, so
Yeah.
that they're not punished, so that they're able to get into a good school, get a good job, be successful in all the ways that we're taught are the definition of success. So letting everybody off the hook, disconnecting from all of that, allowing how you are right here, right now, being the most you can be in this moment, to be the definition and standard of success. The angels keep coming back to their divine definition of success, is being as you as possible in any moment. And if we extend that same grace to our children, allowing them to be as them as they can possibly be in any given moment, and loving that, even when it pushes our buttons, even when it's what the school says is wrong. Man, and I know that's not an easy place to stay. And fighting against reality is even harder. The biggest form of suffering, right, from Buddha or from any of the spiritual teachers, is fighting what is. So we can't change it. We can't change reality. How can we be with this reality in a different way? How can we be in this reality with more calm, with more presence in the moment, with more love for ourselves and others?
Yeah.
So, how does that feel?
So wonderful and so well spoken. You know, the thing that's really jumping out to me is that Miguel was not a challenging child. He was not even an outlier. He was Miguel, and so I have tried to consciously say I was challenged by him, and and to take ownership that the challenge was in me. He was being Miguel. He was not challenged. He was just Miguel. And you know what? To honor him, he was more Miguel than I've ever been Delores. That I'm, 55, 56 years into it, I'm finally being more Delores than I've ever been. And he was more Miguel, like from the get-go, and that was frowned upon. It was labeled, it was discouraged. Now he had a special way of learning and processing, fine, that's the Miguel way to do it. So he wasn't a good child, a bad child, he was Miguel. And so I just invite people to, and that's what I told that friend on the driveway. I was like, your job as a parent and your joy is to enjoy the stuffing out of that little kid and just see what makes him like radiate joy. And all of a sudden, that the love and the joy and the enjoyment really rise to the top, and the challenge disappears. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting how we're taught not to value the differences, right? I mean, the conversation right now is so much about diversity, and yet, in school, it's all the little kids are supposed to do what all the little kids are supposed to do in that moment, not be as Miguel as possible, and as Alejandra as possible, and as Sue and as Dolores as possible in any given moment. And yet that's what the world needs right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So I believe that this is what I'm feeling, is that his physical existence, his as a human, he what is the term that he was? I don't want to say before his time, but he was one of the early messengers, right?
Well, maybe you've heard Abraham Hicks talk about this for a long time, at least 10 years. They've been talking about how so many children are coming in as autistic because they cannot be made to conform by their parents. They are who and how they are. And so they're helping to teach unconditional love.
Right.
And it feels like Miguel was part of that wave of really gifted children, really brilliant children who were just not going to fit in the box ever.
And so we label him oppositional defiant. And he's like, you're right, because I'm not going to fit in the box. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and so interesting that the more you tried to make him fit in the box using standard techniques like reward and punishment, the more he was like, "No way. I'm not getting in the box for any reason whatsoever."
And you couldn't even reward him enough to make him do it if he didn't want to do it. Like you literally couldn't punish him enough and you couldn't reward him enough if he didn't want to do it. He was not going to do it. Yeah.
You know, it's pretty admirable. As a rule follower also, I can say that I really admire that. That,
Yeah.
I wouldn't have gone all those years and then had to relearn who I was and what mattered to me and how to be myself. Wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be wonderful if more kids were able to just retain that all the way through and not have to unlearn the conditioning and the programming and the rules and the how to be teacher's pet, how to be rewarded by mom and dad and the school system and
Yeah.
all the other authority figures. Wow.
Yeah, I was just the walking Pavlov dog, I'm like, oh, there's a bell. Let me beg for the treat. Oh. And I took so much pride in that. Is that
Well, we're taught to.
yeah.
You get all the rewards for being the good little girl. Yeah.
I'm
So,
having way more fun being Delores than the good little girl. Yeah.
yeah.
So, back to the elephant in the room is that, yeah, I want to hear about people's struggle with their kids and, maybe just a little different viewpoint of, really what is your job as a parent. And, yeah.
Yes. So we invite your comments. We invite your comments live and later we'll be sharing. So this video is going to Facebook and it's also going to YouTube. And we invite you to please weigh in and share what challenges you, what challenges you about our conversation, what challenges you as a parent, what challenges you about trying to be as you as possible in any given moment, what feels right or wrong about what we're discussing here. Everything, nothing is off limits. Everything is fair game.
Right.
Ask us anything. And how
Yeah.
can we help?
Yeah. And and the moms who are feeling like that they are, part of the forbidden grief club, that uh, be very cautious about, looking back and the shoulda, coulda, wouldas. But looking back, gosh, I see things in a different perspective, and it actually helps to relieve the regret and the self-judgment and self-condemnation of being an imperfect mother, and just seeing, wow, let me look at it from a different angle. Is that and how can I appreciate my child even more? And God. So, we're not saying don't look back, but, don't do it with a view of condemnation of all the mistakes you made.
Right. In fact, we're inviting you to look back through the lens of appreciation for the uniqueness of your child
Yes.
and the uniqueness of your journey together as parent and child.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for this today. This was it's such a beautiful place to share and to speak very frankly about things that maybe some people don't know how to talk about, or it feels very uncomfortable, and bringing it to a place of love. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
I love you.
I
Bye.
love you all. Bye.